Hi, this is Radhakrishnan. Welcome to Python tutorial episode 8. The topics that I want to discuss today is classes in Python. What is a class? A class is an extensible program or code template for creating objects. Each class instance can have attributes attached to it for maintaining the states and methods for modifying the states. Let's see the schema for defining the classes. Here, you have to note two special keywords: class, which specify the start of the class definition, and colon for block statement. There are three types of objects in classes that we should understand. 1. Class objects. 2. Instance objects. 3. Method objects. Let's see them one by one. Class objects supports two kinds of operations: attribute references and instantiation. Let's see one example for understanding these two operations. Here I am defining a class called calc with x attribute and y attribute and one more add function and attribute. Then I can refer the x and y of the class using the dotted notation. We can refer these attributes using the class as calc.x and calc.y, which returns the integer variables, and calc.add, which returns a function objects. Class instantiation uses function notation. Just pretend that class object is a parameterless function that returns a new instance of the class. For example, in the screen, I have created an instance for the class calc and I have assigned that object to the ins variable. But many classes likes to create the objects with some initial state or populating the attribute with some initial values. Therefore, a class may define a special method called underscore underscore init underscore underscore. In this case, the arguments passed to the class instantiation function are passed to the underscore underscore init underscore underscore function. The 3 and 2 are assigned to the x and y in the init function, which is passed argument to that function. The next object is instance objects. Now we have created the instance from the class using class instantiation. Okay, what can we do with the instance objects? There are two kinds of attribute that can be used in the instance objects: data attributes and method attributes. Let's see the one example of data attributes. Here I have created an instance for the class calc and I am creating a new attribute counter which is not there in the class itself. This is a dynamic attribute and I am doing some calculation on that attribute and then I am deleting the data attribute. So the data attribute can be created dynamically on the instance objects. So what is a method? A method is a function that belongs to an object. Here I am defining the same calc class with init method and one more method add, which gives the addition of the two variables, and I'm creating the instance for the calc and I'm calling the add function. What exactly happens when a method is called? You may have noticed that the add function is called without any argument, but the definition of the add function in the class is taking one argument called self. What happened to that argument? Surely Python would have raised an exception when a function that requires an argument is called without any argument, even if the argument is not used inside the function, right? The special of the instance method is that the instance itself is passed as the first argument for the function that is defined in the class. For example, the ins.add method is same as calling the method something like this, where you're calling the add function using the class name itself and passing the ins instance as the first argument. In general, calling a method with a list of arguments is equivalent to calling the corresponding function with an argument list that is created by inserting the method's instance object before the first argument. Here, the ins is added as the first argument, and if the add function accepts any more argument, that is passed as the second and third arguments, and so on. Class and instance variables. Generally speaking, instance variables are for data uniqueness. So each instance should have its own variables and values attached to it. Class variables are for attributes and methods shared by all instances of the class. Let's look at class and instance variables using one example program. Here I have defined a class called dog, which is having an instance variable kind with the value canine and a instance variable called name. And I'm creating a new two instances of the same class with the two initial values of Fido and Buddy. As a first step, I'm printing the class variable value and the instance variable value using the instance itself. And then I'm changing the class variable's value using the class name itself instead of instance variable, and I'm printing the class variable's value using the instance. Then later I'm changing the class variable's value using one of the instance variable, and I'm printing the class variable's value using the same instances. Let's execute the program and understand the output. As expected, the class variable's value canine got printed in both the instances, and the instance variable Fido and Buddy got printed using the instance variables. Later, I have changed the class variable's value as an Indian using the class name itself. So the definition of the class variable's name itself is changed, and it got reflected in both the instances class variable's value. And in the third example, I have changed the class variable's value in one of the instances using the instance instead of the class name itself, but that changed the class variable's value only in that instance, not on the other one. And finally, I have changed the instance variable value in one of the instance, so the value is changed in only one instance, not the other one. So the main point that we have to note here is, when you are changing the class variable using the class name, that will get reflected in all the instances that is created using the class definition only when the instance itself is not modifying the class variable. In only those instances, the modified value of class variables will get reflected. So let's look at the one wrong way of using the class instance variable. Here I have defined a class called dog as in the same previous example, and I have a tricks as my class variable and name as my instance variable. And in one of the function called add trick, I'm keep appending the tricks done by the dog in the tricks list. First, I'm creating the two instances of the same class with the initial value of Fido and Buddy, and I'm adding the add trick for the first instance rollover and play dead for the second instance of the class. Let's look at the output of this program. So the tricks of both the instances is added into the same class instance. This is wrong because Instances must be having unique data attributes as much as possible. Here, the trick added for one instance is changed the tricks in the second instance also. So, what is the right approach for defining this? Instead of defining the trick as a class variable, you have to define the trick as a instance variable where the variable will be scoped only to that instance. Here also, I am creating a two instance of the same class with Fido and Buddy as the initial value, and then I'm adding the trick for the first instance as a rollover, play dead as the trick for the second instance. Let's run the program and see the output. Here, as expected, the first instance was having only the rollover, second instance is having play dead as the trick. One thing we should remember is class variables should not be declared as a collection objects, which will create issues in the instance value uniqueness. Exercise. Today's exercise is create a new class definition for the core object which can have data attributes like speed, model, and so on. It should also have method attributes to change and modify those data attributes. Thank you.